that are wiping out lots of rainforests has to be, we have to be careful. When we buy soap, for example, palm oil.
We have to look at the consumer product that we're buying.
Oil.
Yes.
How about owls?
I think when, even recently, big corporations have been destroying forests just for their own purposes, dropping herbicides and pesticides so to such an extent that it kills everything in the forest before they go into log. It makes it easier to go in and log. And they've completely destroyed the ecosystem. And when they do that, we can't get it back. I mean, you can't, it's not replaceable. And
save it, definitely, by all means.
And when you realize that you have, that we have intelligences around us, that it's like having intelligences from other planets that are so complex, like this owl. We're destroying things that are so intelligent that we could learn from before we have a chance.
We'll definitely continue to learn from them.
Right.
And insects?
Insects are the same as both of these. They are important to us. If we destroy, as we say, a plot of land or a house, we're taking something away. If we buy a lot, build a commercial building on it, we're replacing something. Do we need all of these areas to begin with? We need to look a little bit closer.
Let's just remember that all of these animals have a place, and I want to thank you so very much for reminding us of that important fact, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
I have been speaking with Ingriani Shapiro, who is co-founder of the Orangutan Republic Foundation, Jerry Larson, who is an amateur entomologist and hobbyist, who is past president of the Lorquin Entomological Society, and Stacy O'Brien, a wildlife rescuer and rehabilitation expert, and author of Wesley the Owl, The Remarkable Love Story of an Owl and His Girl. And for viewers who would like more information, an address and phone number will be on the screen at the end of the credits. On behalf of our nonprofit organization, Educational Communications, I'm Nancy Pearlman, wishing you a natural, unspoiled environment.
Running. Now ain't there one going my way. Oh, well, the one runs at midnight, the other one running just for day. Running just for day. Running just for day. Oh, Lord. Sure enough to end. Oh, well. Ho, 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 ho. Somebody help me with this blues. Why? She's the one I'm loving, she's the one I do hate to lose. I do hate to lose. I do hate to lose. Oh, Lord, sure enough she is. Oh, well, I've been crazy, yes, I've been a fool. Well, I've been crazy all of my life. well, I done fell in love with another man's wife. With another man's wife. With another man's wife. Oh, Lord. Sure enough, I did. Oh, hell. Lord, she's so long and short till she went black hell with a tree. Why don't I say she's no good, but she's alright. She's alright with me. She's alright with me. She's alright, she's alright. She's alright, she's alright. She's alright, she's alright. She's alright, she's alright.
Boogie, woogie, boogie, woogie, country girl. Well, I mean, my boogie, woogie, country girl. Now, if you take that music with a beat, rock and roll it, is me, my boogie, woogie, boogie, woogie, boogie, woogie, country girl. Well, I mean, my boogie, woogie, country girl. Saturday night, she comes to town and plays a jukebox, and there's a my boogie woogie, boogie woogie, boogie woogie country girl. Well, I mean, my boogie woogie country girl. No, no, no. Cherry, she can't milk a cow. She don't like squares, cause daddy don't allow. My boogie woogie, boogie woogie, boogie woogie country girl. Well, I mean, my boogie woogie country girl. Well, she's up every morning about 5:30. She likes to go fishing, gonna keep you alive. My boogie woogie, boogie woogie, boogie woogie country girl. Well, I mean, my boogie woogie country girl.
pepper. She's sweet like cherry wine. The whole town knows she's perfect. The whole band knows she's mine. She's my baby. She's my baby. What a treat. Well, I can't call her sugar. Sugar never was so sweet. And it ain't no surprise. She served me in my bed. She mad at you, my dad. She wiped dandruff from my head. She's my baby. She's my baby, don't you see? I said I can't call her sugar. Sugar never was so sweet. Ah, sugar don't get that sweet. baby. She's my baby, what a treat. Well, now I can't call her sugar. Sugar never was so sweet. Oh, we got to do the steak dinner breakdown, y'all. pepper. She's sweet like cherry wine. The whole town knows she's perfect. The whole town knows she's mine. She's my baby. She's my baby, don't you see? I said I can't call her sugar. Sugar never was so sweet. I said I can't call her sugar. Sugar never was so sweet. I said I can't call her sugar. Sugar never was so sweet. Oh, baby, 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 baby. I said, come back, baby. I wanna play house with you. Well, you may go to college, you may go to school, now you may drive a big Cadillac. Don't you bring nobody's fool. Well, now, baby, come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, I wanna play house with you. Well, listen to me, baby. That's what I'm talking about. Come on back to me, little girl, so we can play some house. Now, baby, come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, I wanna play house with you. Oh, let's play house a while. Come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, I won't play house with you. Well, listen to me, baby. Please try to understand. I'd rather see you dead, little girl, than went to another man. Now, baby, come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, I won't play house with you. Oh, let's rock a while. Baby, come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, I won't play house with you. Oh, baby, baby, baby. Baby, 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 mama, mama, mama. Baby, baby, baby. Baby, baby, baby. I said, come back, baby. I wanna play house with you. This is a made-up world to try to live it by yourself. Can't get the one you love and have to use somebody else. I've got the blues. I'm gonna pack my things and go. Yeah, I've got the blues. I'm gonna pack my things and go. You don't really love me. I'm just unlucky, so and so. Sometimes I wonder why can your love be so cold? Sometimes I wonder why can your love be so cold? Seems like you don't really love me. You loving Mr. So-and-so. This is a mean-old world to try to live it by yourself. This is a mean-old world to try to live it by yourself. Can't get the one you love and have to use somebody else.
In the past
say we could be living in the street with nothing to eat. We're only a paycheck away. Ting, 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 so loving, love out, kindness in and kindness out. Hope in, hope out. And around and around and around it goes. It's the cosmic law. And around and around and around it goes. It's the cosmic law of the universe. The universe. It's like a big computer downloading what you do. So you better watch out what you put in it, baby, because you know it's gonna go right back to you. Simple. Love out, kindness in and kindness out. Hope in and hope out. And around and around and around it goes. It's the cosmic law. Round and around it goes. It's the cosmic law. And around and around and around it goes. It's the cosmic law of the universe. The universe. Give with your time while it shines like diamonds, oh so fine. And a give from your heart is the highest form of earthly art. And a give with your talents while it keeps the universe in balance. And a give.
I just sort of abandoned. Don't want That's all right. I'll take it home. Take care of it. Take it home.
I call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember James Cohen. Councilmember Grimes.
Here.
Councilmember Nail.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Councilmember Simmons.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Okay, we have a slightly revised agenda this evening. We don't have any minutes to adopt, so they've been dropped from the agenda, and the special session item 4 has been revised. And there's also some revised information on the first item, on the first work session item on the nuclear weapons contractors. So just an FYI that there's been a couple of those changes. Now, upcoming tomorrow night, Wednesday, February 19th, we have the first of 2 city department roundtables with the council, and that'll be in this room at 7 o'clock. And just for your information, once I get to the right page here, the departments tomorrow night will be in this order: Recreation, Finance, Human Resources, and Housing and Community Development. And then next Monday, the 24th, we'll have 2 public hearings on Boyd Avenue and Garland Avenue traffic calming. And then next Thursday, we'll have the second of our department roundtables, again at 7 o'clock in this room. And this is in no particular order, but the departments will be Library, Police, Public Works, Communications, and Information Systems. Then Wednesday, March 5th, a reminder that we have a City Council forum with the Tacoma Voice and the Gazette at 7 o'clock in this room. And a reminder, this is just about Tacoma Park issues, and it's a follow-up to the forum that we had just before the last election, and said we'd like to do another one And I know everybody can't be here, but we'll try and do another one, and we'll just try and do these if people think they're valuable. And then just one other thing to point out, more than a month from now, on Monday, March 24th, we will have a presentation from our new county council member, Sherry Branson, who will be here. So I just want to let people know that for anybody who might want to come and introduce themselves to their new county council member. That's it for the agenda scheduling update. So we have one special session item this evening, and if there are any public comments on that voting item, we would be happy to hear them now. And that's on the resolutions commenting on state legislation. If you want to come to the podium and
my name's Lyndon Wilkes. I live on Willow Avenue. I haven't read this bottle bill legislation in detail, but I'm against it in principle. And I'm going to cite 6 or 7 reasons. I'll be glad to elaborate on each one if you want to ask me questions. But I moved down here about 3.5 years ago from Massachusetts, where I'd lived the previous 52 years, and I'd say the last 20 to 25 of those years we had a bottle bill in Massachusetts, so I have a lot of experience living with this. And these are going to be some of the effects. Prices of beverages will go up. It's going to add filth into grocery stores and any of the reclamation centers. It's going to add congestion. When you go to Whole Foods right now, when I'm there 4 or 5 times a week, you're clogged in the aisles all the time. This is just another thing that'll congest the store, any store. You're going to end up with a lot of wasted time. The machines where you put the cans in to recycle and get your little ticket, they break all the time. Or the other big time waster is you come in with a half dozen bottles to recycle in one of these machines, and all of a sudden somebody with a grocery cart's come in just before you. They've got 150 cans and bottles, and you're going to have to wait behind them. This is also a disguised revenue raiser, and I can elaborate on how that works, but it's on a couple of levels, it's really a hidden revenue raiser for Maryland, and that's the reason politicians like these kind of things, is any way they can collect revenue where people don't really know that they're being hidden taxed. If you collect bottles and cans in bulk, then you're going to have to go to some kind of sort of recycling center, because the grocery stores won't allow you to come in with several hundred cans, and where you got to go to turn those in, it's likely going to be a seedy kind of environment and run by seedy kind of people. Now, in the summer, I have the good fortune to spend several weeks in Massachusetts' northern neighbor, the Live Free or Die state, and they're the only state in New England that doesn't have a bottle bill, and yet they don't have cans and bottles all over the place either. I don't see cans of bottles all over the place when I walk around in Tacoma Park. And you might say, well, why should you hold New Hampshire up as an example? I don't know how many of you look at Politico, but about 3 weeks ago, Politico had an article about a study that H.L. Mencken did in the 1940s, and a famous article that he wrote ranking all the states from top to bottom at the time. And in the spirit of this, Politico decided they would try to recreate this kind of ranking based on current information and current data. And they pulled together 17 different recent polls and built a composite of those polls. And lo and behold, what came out as the best state in the country was New Hampshire. And so if you want to do like a good business would do and copy the people that have best practices, you really should look to New Hampshire and not sort of middle of the road, run-of-the-mill states like Maryland, which according to my memory, I didn't have time to double check this, I think they came in 22nd best state to live in. So
that's correct.
This is another, to me there's this tendency in Tacoma Park to have like solutions looking for a problem, that there's no real recycling problem here. You have a very active participation in recycling. If you walk downtown, there's recycling barrels. It's just another case of trying to regulate people rather than trusting them to act responsibly on their own. And that's what New Hampshire gets, and you guys don't.
Thanks very much for your comments.
And one other quick thing. If you don't turn your can in, you lose your nickel. And at current money market rates, you'd have to put $5,000 in the money market for a year to earn one nickel.
Thanks. And if I can just note, I forgot to note last week for the city manager or whoever that the buzzer doesn't work correctly. It does the 3 minutes, but it doesn't do the 30-second warning.
You have to yell.
So it could be that I have to go back to the programming directions and reprogram it, but I'll do that if I have to, but if somebody wants to look at it, I appreciate it. So now we'll move to public comments on any of our work session items or anything that's not on our agenda. We'd welcome comments. Mr. Lovelace in the back.
My name is Mr. Lovelace, your official peace delegate, Pat Lovelace. I just wanted to bring up tonight the idea of having our ward nights back. I'd like to see that because we used to sometimes have a good number of people in the audience who would speak up on the sidewalk issues, their other issues and other things. And also, I'd like to see that come back. I'd like to see one night a month, if possible, or whatever. I'd like to see 1 month set aside for a night with the children, that the children speak out, have a part of the public forum, speak out to listen to what they have to say for once. Because I know that they have problems in school and they have problems getting to and from school. And I'd like to see them speak out on what their issues are with our city. Because you hardly hear from them much now. We hear from them in the Young Activist Club, and I really commend their work. And also, I wanted to wish Kay Daniels Cohen a really good recovery. I hope she's doing okay, as I miss her at the meetings. I was hoping to see her again, and I hope we do. Because she's not only a council member of mine in the city, but she's also a really good friend of mine in the city. And I'd like to see her get well. And I can't give you a gold star or anything because you get the gold stars. I give you a gold peace sign and hope that you recover. And thank you for everything you've done for our city. And I hope you can get this big hug I'm trying to give you over the TV. I hope you see it. And anyway, another thing too is, what was I going to say? Another thing, too, is what I would like to see done also is finding out what we're doing about the snow regulations. Is everybody supposed to clear their sidewalk off in front of their house within 24 hours in every development? Or is it supposed to be every 48 hours, or is that the city's responsibility? Because we had a really bad cocker of a snowstorm. And we went out, my nurse came in and she had a hard time getting in the next day because the sidewalks were not shoveled or plowed. There was just big heaps of snow there. And I'm wondering what we should do about that. Because she's having a really time getting into to take care of me and my medication sometimes. It was very difficult for them to get in. And I really appreciate the work they're doing. And I'm hoping we can do something to help her in return by seeing what we can do to get them sidewalks unshoveled, unplugged, and get them shoveled out. And anyway, we're coming up on the midterm elections. Register to vote and then come out and vote. You see what's going on with our Congress and our Senate? Let's correct the problem. If you don't like it, let's get up there and vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? Seeing none, we'll move along. Council comments. Well, I have a couple things. Following up on Mr. Lovelace's comments, I've talked to the city manager about my feelings about where we are on enforcing our regulations on snow clearing. I know that our city regulations call for sidewalks to be clear full width within 24 hours after a storm finishes. And I think we've had a history over the years of just storms that really need that happening only every few years, and then when we get to that, people kind of forget. I'd like to see some positive reinforcements for people who do clear both their own and others' sidewalks, and I'd like to see some enforcement for people who don't. My feeling is if we send out some citations to people, they'll be very aware of what the rules are. I've seen a lot of dangerous situations. I think the main reason for this, for enforcing this kind of regulation, is that it puts people in great danger when they don't have the sidewalks to walk on and they're left balancing on top of piles of snow with traffic going by, and they can fall into the traffic and get seriously injured or killed. And I wouldn't want that to happen. I see it in this. I see those types of situations in the city. I see them all around the metropolitan area. It's an area-wide problem. I know it can be intractable. I know there are issues with larger entities, including governments, who are trying to clear streets with plows, and that's where the crews are. So it's harder to get to sidewalks around parks and things like that. So there are always hard issues that lead to a feeling that you can't really come down on people for not following the law, but I feel like if we have the law, we need to enforce it, and it's a matter of public safety. I do want to note with sadness the passing of two people who had a great impact on Tacoma Park in the last couple of weeks. Their passing in the last couple of weeks. One is Frank Holmes, who had his office and home for some time in the Pinecrest neighborhood. He's a former president of the Pinecrest Citizens Association, and he and his wife were very active in the whole annexation into Tacoma Park before unification in 1997 of the Pinecrest neighborhood, and he just died last week. Also like to note the passing of John Parsley, who was a longtime volunteer with the Tacoma Park Fire Department, and he died last week as well. The final thing I'd like to note is the upcoming town hall meeting on cross-border crime trends and crime prevention that will be in this room 1 week from tonight, February 25th at 7 o'clock. It's scheduled from 7 to 9, and it's intended to be a discussion with a number of area police chiefs about cross-border crime and what can be done to prevent it and to reduce it. And I have a feeling that the room will be full, so come early to get a seat, and I hope that it's an interesting discussion. I have a feeling that there may be some additional meetings that spin off from that one with particular neighborhoods, but we'll see how that goes, and invite everybody to come next Tuesday, February 25th in this room at 7 o'clock. Councilmember Smith, you have some, Schultz, you have some comments.
A couple things. With regard to talking about snow removal, I just think it's helpful to send a compliment to the Department of Public Works that consistently, when we have these significant snowstorms, I mean, stuff that sticks on the streets and causes schools to be closed and that level, over the years they are out there overnight or doing whatever they need to do for as long as they need to do it to get keep every street, lane, and court open. I drove around Thursday in my ward and I found no place. This was within 4 or 5 hours after the snow had stopped. Found no place really that had not been adequately plowed so that people could to get by. And of course, as Mayor Williams has just pointed out, the sidewalks are something altogether different. And it's very hit and miss. And I think we need to do a job of educating our residents. We have to remind ourselves there's constant turnover of homeowners and renters in the houses in our city who may not be familiar with the rules here, who may not even be familiar with snow, for that matter, depending where they've come from. And we need to do that, and if handing out tickets or whatever it is sufficient to help that along, maybe that's a good idea. I just want to also mention, while I have the mic, the City Council a few weeks ago approved a resolution authorizing the closing of Ann Street this summer on Wednesdays for about 6 hours, and that's for the Crossroads Farmers Market. Farmers Market is moving. I just wanted to say that the Crossroads Farmers Market will be setting up there in May. This will be their new home, which I think will probably be a good one for years to come. And we're in the process right now of coordinating the location with the owner, with a leasing manager for the adjacent shopping center where the Safeway used to be, and hoping to get their cooperation for issues related to parking and location of vendors and that sort of thing, so that it turns out to be the market can benefit the merchants in that shopping center at the same time it's benefiting the vendors who are doing their selling their fruits and vegetables, at the same time as that the residents in the area are able to access all of this great food. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's exciting. It'll be opening in May. I know that seems like a half a century away right now, but it's not that far off, believe me. Have faith. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Any other council comments? Seeing none, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. I want to remind residents that this Saturday, 1-4 at historic Tacoma, the Tacoma Park Co-op is sponsoring their annual Food and Public Policy Series. This Saturday's topic is Health of the Bay and its impact on food farmers and consumers. That's this Saturday, February 22nd, 1 to 4 p.m. Thank you.
Anybody else? We'll move to the city manager's comments.
Thank you. Just two small things. One, also to thank you to the Public Works and the snow folks. I know that some of our drivers were working 48 hours and some 72 hours to get as much up as possible. So I really applaud their work. I know, because I received a lot of emails, not everybody was happy about everything, and so there's always room for improvement. And so that's one of the things that we'll be discussing with the Public Works group at a after actions discussion around snow removal this time. But I do want to commend them for their efforts, because I think it was an extraordinary snow, and I think that they did their best. Just the second item is just also, as has been mentioned, tomorrow night's Department Roundtable will be the first of two. And again, tomorrow night is really just an opportunity for a conversation. There's not going to be any budget numbers that are going to be discussed per se. This is really just an opportunity to understand what some of the department heads are seeing, to get some feedback in terms of things that you all are seeing as interesting. But I mean, it's really honestly sort of an experiment, and so I'm hopeful that it's helpful for everybody who participates tomorrow night as well as next Thursday. Thank you.
Any questions for the city manager? Thank you for those comments. We will now move to our work session item, our first one, and this is a discussion of procurement, a list of nuclear weapons contractors in conformance with the Nuclear Free Ordinance. Reminder that we have a revised packet item here in front of us, and I guess the city clerk is going to brief us on this item.
I can do that. We were expecting Paul Gunter to be here this evening. I think he was planning to arrive by 8, so we may be a little ahead of him, but...
That's all right, we'll keep going.
Keep going, so he could field some questions that perhaps I can't, but I think the important information to note since last time we met is to say that MSCI has offered to reduce its rate to $6,000 per year. They would provide the list annually for that price. The Nuclear Free Committee is very comfortable with the codes that would be used in developing the list, and is also comfortable with an annual update of the list. And I see Paul has just arrived, so if the council has any questions, I'd be happy to respond, or Paul is here, Paul Gunter is here, and he could also respond.
We were just getting briefed on the fact that their price is now reduced to $6,000. And the price for the one that was a similar type contract from Bloomberg, $5,700, so it's very close to that one.
Yes.
And the recommendation from the committee is for going forward with the MSCI, correct? And staff concurs with that.
Yes.
Is there council questions, council discussion?
Just I have one question.
Councilmember Smith.
During that year, if there is other information, will it be provided to you, or is it just an annual update?
It's my understanding that MSCI would provide as a service, a single spreadsheet annually.
Okay.
But I would assume, in talking with Mr. Kogan, he was very amenable to working with the city. So, I think that the service itself is an annual subscription rate for that $6,000, and then I'm sure that we can consult at any time.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayo.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Paul. Could you just refresh my memory for why, and staff is welcome to comment on this too, why would we take this approach of using a list as opposed to using the self-certification process that we also have in place? So why would the self-certification not be adequate?
Well, it was my understanding that the city was working from a list with the self-certification as a backup. I think that it would be another step to rely solely on self-certification. Granted that the list was dated, and that's why we began this search, so that we could provide a compliance service that, basically, I think, provides some transparency. I think that certainly in the committee's view, this is about opening the dialogue and providing a transparency to this issue. And I think that that's just as much an important part that the city can play as letting the anonymity of the nuclear weapons industry, prevail.
And then I'm sorry.
Just the only other thing that I might add, in addition to what was mentioned before, is I know the self-certification process is just that, it's a self-certification, and there isn't a consistent list of information that people are looking at. So I know that our self-certification talks about you're asked to the best of your ability acknowledge that the organization that you represent doesn't have any ties, but there's no consistent list with which everybody, when they do that self-certification, is looking at. So the list may also just be another step in terms of having some consistency of a list that we don't really have right this second.
And I'm wondering if maybe the clerk could talk a little bit about the use that the staff has for this list in thinking about vendors, because it's not just, when there's a contract being let or something, but it's like maybe even potentially, like I know in the past when Hewlett-Packard was on the list, the city didn't buy Hewlett-Packard printers, so there's no self-certification on the part of a vendor that if the city's going out to buy a little piece of equipment like something for a computer, you don't really have any basis for going to that manufacturer and saying, will you certify this piece of equipment if we buy it? And, oh, by the way, this piece of equipment costs $29.
Right, that's exactly right. Using the list helps us to, so we know certain vendors, for certain manufacturers and so on that we need to avoid in looking for contracts and looking for vendors to purchase things from. And even I know Able and Information Systems, Mr. Castillo, has relied on that list over the years when he's purchasing equipment for printers, computers, and phones. So we have not purchased Motorola phones. I know the police department has, but the city has not. For regular staff, he has not purchased Motorola phones, for instance. So he has relied on that list.
The police radios are Motorola was because that was a sole source and it was a public safety waiver.
Correct. Yeah. The other thing to note, just let me add one more thing. The way the city code reads right now, there must be a list. You could change the code, but that's the way it's structured now.
Okay. And then a follow-up question that any of you may be able to answer. So I'm assuming for the company, this list is essentially proprietary information that is valuable to them. For example, they sell it to us. And so my assumption based on that is that we wouldn't, for example, be able to publish a list or put it anywhere visible. It would be used for staff purposes in the ways you just described. Would be available as a screen looking at contract applications, but it's not something we'd be able to publicly disseminate in any way. Correct. Is that right? Okay.
That's correct. And just to add to what we mentioned at the last meeting, we are working concurrent to the city to make a public list available through what was formerly Nuclear Free America. So, at some point, though it's not on a schedule at this point, we would seek to, through a series of non-government organizations, make a public list available, essentially from the same codes, the DoD and the DOE codes, which are public, as they are government codes, they are public.
And then my last comment, if I can move to comments, is I guess I have real concerns about buying something that would cost us this much every year. So, for example, it would give me, and that relates to my last question about whether the staff, whether you literally have a list you can hold on to and use for a period of time, or whether it's something that, that wouldn't work for some reason. So the idea, for example, of buying one of these lists and updating it every 5 years, of council putting in place a policy that says, we'll purchase this list, but we're not going to redo it for 5 years, that would spread out the cost over a period of time. But the idea of spending this much money every year, year after year, gives me a bit of a heartache, and certainly every bit of feedback. All the constituents that I got feedback on, and this was the issue I got the most feedback on this week, but for snow, was negative. Thank you.
And just to clarify on Councilmember Mayall's last point, my understanding is that this proposal is to provide more than an annual update, so that the annual purchase would involve some additional information on a more regular basis than annually.
Paul may know better. My understanding is that they're now talking about an annual update. Is that your understanding?
The last email communication we had with Doug Kogan was that the $6,000 rate was for an annual an annual list.
So they wouldn't update it on a
The period for
Shorter
update
basis.
is every year per subscription. That's the current.
Was I misreading something, or was there an earlier version that talked about quarterly?
It was under discussion.
Okay.
That was at the 8,700 subscription rate. They lowered the rate,
Right.
but they clarified that it was for an annual update. Again, my sense, though, is that we can, certainly the committee can go back for consultations with MSCI. Because, again, their aim is for ethical governance. And I think that that's an ethic of their own. And so, in our discussions, that flexibility, I think, invites consultation if we needed it within the year.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, I had 3 questions, but Councilmember Mail already asked 2 of them. So one of the people commenting by email said this, and we get copies of emails that the city receives or becomes aware of here. So that's how I know about it. This person points out that other jurisdictions in the United States have similar ordinances, and that would include, and you may already know this, Marin County, California, Berkeley, California, Jersey City, New Jersey, Hoboken, New Jersey, Amherst, Massachusetts, and Hood River County, Oregon. And this person simply asks, what do those communities do as a way to screen companies? And I'm wondering if you have the slightest, if you have any idea. I would imagine you might have some familiarity with that.
Well, without a list of the Nuclear Free America sign-on groups and cities, there was an ongoing Nuclear Free America, and that lapsed.
Right.
And so those cities and groups were getting their updates through that last publicized list was 2006.
Right, it's been a while.
So they would be reliant upon the same DOD and DOE codes, and that update lapsed. So it's my understanding, though, that Tacoma Park is actually more. It has an aim to enforce its code, rather than for it to be a namesake or a
nominal.
But my sense is that, and certainly our experience through the committee is that the city takes its codes seriously, and they make best efforts to enforce codes, and certainly that's the aim of the committee in its charter. So I can tell you that we did outreach to a number of city and town nuclear-free groups, and a lot of the groups are disbanded. And so, right now, I think that the city is taking its these steps towards enforcement of a code more seriously. That the committee has stayed together. And so, it's our intent to work jointly with the council to uphold this code and to promote the ethic that it seeks to deliver.
I appreciate your comments on that. I'm not well versed in this whole subject matter, so it's very helpful to me.
I mean, we're quite proud of the fact that the city takes this particular code to this level.
Right.
You know, this dialogue, for example, within council is, you know, we view this as a very important process of ethical government. And we would like to lift up the city of Tacoma Park to show that that nuclear weapons remain a serious issue, that they are still controversial weapon systems, and that there are, you know, there is a public that supports ethical government in looking to address this threat.
Couple comments. The first one is that I guess this has nothing to do with Tacoma Park, is I just don't understand why all this information should be so hard to obtain. I mean, because there are so many websites, and businesses are always, by nature, wanting to promote what it is they do, what their services are, what their industrial sectors are, where their expertise lies. But yet when it comes, apparently, to the nuclear, anything having to do with the nuclear power industry or the nuclear weapons industry or medical, I don't know, it's all like, oh, well, we don't want anybody to know about it. And that just seems, on the surface, it just seems strange, seems crazy. But that's just my...
I think that speaks to the heart of the issue.
Yeah, because if you had a list, then maybe more municipalities like those that I just mentioned wouldn't give up so easily and just sort of throw in the towel.
Yes.
I do incline to agree. My other comment is with Councilmember Mayle is that I'm not sure we need to be making a deal with this company for more than 1 year at a time. I think we ought to get this list and use it. I'm thinking that this list isn't going to change too dramatically from 1 year to the next to the next. And then that would save us some money. And I think that's an important consideration.
We understand. And again, we're seeking to work with the city and again, to make the list completely transparent and public through NGO work.
Yeah, right, and that's good. Thank you.
What is the term of the contract? Is it a yearly contract or is it multi-year?
It's annual.
Annual subscription.
Right, so it's not a multi-year commitment, so it's kind of moot. We can reevaluate it at any time.
Right, and it would be good if the committee could work out with the NGOs to make this list available more widely, more publicly, and for less cost. It's just that we were in that situation and we got stranded. And so there's a history of that maybe working for a while and then falling apart.
Right.
Councilmember Mayle.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Councilmember Grimes' comment, I think it's not a moot issue because, I mean, my experience in council is that we sometimes do something and then it can become a habit. And so what I was leaning toward was an explicit statement of council policy that when we vote, if we vote for something like this, that we have an intent to not do it again in the next year or the year after that or for some period of time. And so
to do what? To not do what?
To repurchase, right? To automatically repurchase the list.
But would we?
I wouldn't object to putting language in the is it a resolution that says that the matter must be brought back before the council again in a year for renewal?
And that's where I was headed with my comment, was just that by stating that sort of intent or background to our discussion, it may help clarify what the next city staff and the next council do. Just one other comment, which is a bit of a broader one, but I really wish that there was a way, if we're going to pay for a list, that we could actually get lists of as it were, the worst companies in all sorts of respects. So, you know, labor standards, environmental standards, sustainability standards, you know, broader social responsibility, and have this be one of the components. But I can imagine that gets much more costly. But I think ultimately that's where I would hope that we as a city might be going.
Councilmember Mail, I could add that MSCI, in its ethical investment policy, we could talk about add value with MSCI. For example, nuclear weapons is just one aspect of controversial weapons like landmines or poison gas, or they track those companies, and but they also have a broader issue of ethics and companies dealing in ethical issues that might provide some add value through the same company, through the But again, it's my understanding that these are primarily services that are provided through tracking government codes, and somebody's got to do that work and do it consistently, and that's been the tug of war.
Councilmember Grimes.
Per the clerk's comment that the list is required in the code, I just pulled it up, and I do see that it says that the list is supposed to be published annually. That implies that it's supposed to be refreshed annually. For what it's worth, we wouldn't have to renew this particular contract, but we'd have to find some mechanism.
Well, nor could we publish it.
Right.
Yeah, we can.
Well, published is a slippery word. It could be, things get published privately.
But listening to the conversation among my colleagues, it sounds like it would be possible, if we wanted to go that direction, to say that maybe we rotate and have the nuclear list provided one year and some other aspect of what you were just talking about, that they could do different codes for different ethical standards and get that information and do something with that in a second year, if we decided that that was something that was important. That wouldn't reduce the cost, but it would widen the information that we had available. Any other thoughts from my colleagues? It sounds like there's some interest in including some language that says that basically that staff shouldn't just assume that this contract would be renewed annually, that there would need to be some further discussion with the council. Is there a way that you'd prefer to do that? Is that something that you want to get a sense of now? Is that something that you want to?
I just wanted to know if there's any interest in, because we could come back in a year and I guess based upon feedback that we have internally in terms of how useful or how effective the list has been, come back. We could also just come back at a certain date certain, so we could come back in 2 years or 3 years from now, if there's any interest in the council in having a designated time period by which people...
If I can suggest that maybe we say the first meeting in January of 2015, that we would like a report back from staff on their experience with this list and its usefulness, and so then we would have advice for renewal, unless it needs to be earlier than that, depending on when we purchase now. Maybe it needs to be in the fall.
Well, if
We'll-
we purchase, we're not exactly sure when we're going to get the list. I
True.
don't have a sense of how long it takes. The other thing to think about is our past experience. If this list is similar to what we've had before, the list is what it is. I mean, if it is a spreadsheet, as the past one was, we use it. I don't think there's going to be any special feedback that staff's going to provide. It's really
I'm just thinking about kind of, there's going to be a lot of staff here who haven't had the luxury of working from a list. And so it could be feedback from people who say, yes, I use this all the time, it's helpful, or gee, no, I don't really use this, or whatever the feedback might be, just an opportunity to do that, and that's the marker for the discussion by the council to understand whether we want to continue with it another year or something different. Does that address that concern? Are people comfortable with that, in agreement with that? Yeah, Councilmember Siemens?
Yeah, I wonder if kind of some indication of how useful this was, not just on the fact that it's a spreadsheet and I can read it, but how many purchases really were limited by the use of this list? How many times the list had to be kind of overridden because of other priorities, such as with the police radios we've had in the past. Some kind of numbers as far as whether it's really meaningful in the purchasing process, I think is what I'd be looking for.
People in agreement on that?
Just one more thing, maybe. Could we maybe do it a year from when we actually get the list? Because then that gives us a full year to.
Yeah, all I was thinking about with backing it off from the year was, well, then it's going to be, okay, we need to renew this list.
How about we come back 9 months after we get the list, and that way we'll
Somewhere in the 9-month range, because depending on when you get it, the 9-month period may be in a month when we're on break.
That's right.
So just approximately. Sufficiently prior to a year to be able to make a good decision on a renewal or not.
Oh, that sounds like great language.
Councilmember Mayo.
So this is this would end up being a $5,000 contract. What is our limit for council approval? 6,000. Is our limit 10?
10,000.
So, the contract will go forward without council approval or not.
Yes, but the council will be asked to adopt the list. So
Okay.
perhaps in that, by
Right.
resolution, so in that resolution, you
Okay.
could make your intentions clear.
And I guess my preference in a resolution like that which would become an ordinance, would actually be to go into the code and amend that piece regarding annual publication of a list and try to change that language so that it better matches, I think, where we're headed to right now and the realities of being able to get a list. I mean, I think, yes, the word publish is subject to interpretation, but I think I'm pretty clear what people meant when they wrote it. And I expect publish meant publish, make available to others. So we could just surgically go in and address that language at the same time. And moving an ordinance like that would also allow us to establish intent with regard to, we don't expect the city, whereas the city, may occasionally, or every few years update this list, that would clarify intent. I'm happy with where we're going right now in general, the idea of coming back in 9 months, but in my mind, structuring an ordinance with whereas clauses before it would be helpful in this regard.
Agreed. Everybody happy with that resolution of that? Okay, so we will get something back eventually where we adopt the list, and we'll revisit it at some point in some number of months, about 9 months from now, or from whenever we adopt. And thank you for your help.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move to the next item. And that's a discussion of a proposed ordinance to opt out of Chapter 47 of Montgomery County Code vendors. Notice a continuing discussion of opt-in, opt-out.
Back again. The ordinance before you would opt out of the county's vendor regulations, and the way we got to this point was, you'll recall, last year we amended our own vendor code to facilitate kind of the expansion of the food truck pilot program. That was successful, and what we wanted to do was have food trucks be able to rotate through specified locations on city property. And we came to discover, after council adopted that ordinance, that the county believed that even these vendors operating on city property would be required to obtain site-specific county vendor permits at a cost of over $400 per permit per location, which would not work well with our statute and our goal. So this issue is back before you to opt out of the county law and to make some tweaks to the city code to bring back what we'd be losing by opting out of the county code. Primarily, that's the addition of a liability insurance requirement and indemnification requirement for vendors operating on public roadways. We clarify that a county food service license will still be required. I mean, really, we don't lose too much by opting out of the county. It was kind of a belt and suspenders approach. A lot of people don't even realize municipal governments exist, and when they would need a permit, they go to the county. So we were hoping to catch people who might not come to the city that way, but I think if we're vigilant, we can enforce our own vendor law, no problem.
Questions? Councilmember Schultz.
Having concerned myself with one more or less permanent food truck vendor in my ward, I became aware that the permitting that has gone on in the past has been basically done solely by the county's Department of Permitting Services, and that the city, other than suspicions of health violations, perhaps, or something of that, really has currently has had no role in that process. It's more or less sort of it's been taken care of. For example, if a private property owner that's commercially zoned decided that they wanted to have a vending truck in their, and I say a commercial property owner, a vending truck selling food out of their parking area, they can do that insofar as it doesn't violate the zoning code, which of course is also enforced by the Department of Permitting Services. So having said all that, by opting out, then would we be basically saying that we will be taking over completely the permitting process for vendors, except for, of course, for the health inspections?
Right. So in that example, they would need a city site-specific permit, and we would look at the site and make sure it doesn't interfere with traffic and there's adequate space, things like that.
And then we'd have the enforcement to threaten withdrawal of a permit if there was some activity by the vendor that we felt was out of conformance with what we'd approved.
Right.
Okay. I think that's a good thing.
And if I can just follow up on that, in the instance that we had, that we became aware of in an earlier discussion of this, where the vendors are supposed to return to their home base every night to sanitize, clean, do whatever they're supposed to do, and there was one that was parked there for a long time and obviously hadn't, that would continue to be a county health issue, or is that something that would fall under the city's purview in this kind of hybrid system?
To the extent that the returning to home base requirement comes out of the health code, that would still be the county's job to enforce, but it's certainly something that we're more likely to become aware of and that we can bring to the attention of.
So we would anticipate that there would continue to be close cooperation between the county in its health code enforcement and the city.
Right, there's no reason that that should change.
Let me ask, if I may, another question. Well, where we have existing vendors now that are more or less like, I'm thinking of the one at the corner of Ethan Allen and New Hampshire Avenue. It's been there for many years. Would we be responsible, assuming we go through this with this, to notify that vendor that at a certain point, they're going to need to be dealing with us? Or in other words, does their permit just stay permanent, or is it something that has to be periodically re-upped?
Yeah, it's it's an annual permit.
Okay.
And Jesse, you may know, I don't know, Jesse, do you know, do they have a city permit already?
Yes, they have both a county and a city permit at this time.
Uh-huh.
When it's time for renewal, they will not need their county, they'll only need their county health department license, but they'll be subject to review by the city for the other piece of it.
Good. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. And just following up on that particular vendor, I recall as part of the discussion, and I can't remember if it was Ms. Daines or I think it was Ms. Daines, suggesting that it seemed potentially unlikely that under our new ordinance and policy that vendor was going to be able to continue to operate there because of its proximity to residences and inadequate trash facilities. And I think the trash issue has continued to remain an issue. At least I've heard from residents about it. So I guess there's been no action or change the city has taken with regard to that particular vendor as a result of our food truck policy.
No, they've notified of the, after the code was changed, they were notified of the new requirements for city site review, but I'm not aware of any change in status to this point, and I don't know what kind of enforcement has gone on.
Okay. Would Ms. Daines be aware of that, do you think?
Someone in housing will, if
Yeah.
not Ms. Daines,
Okay,
someone
okay.
else. Yeah.
Maybe we could just get a follow-up on that issue and an email or something like that afterwards. I guess the other issue I just wanted to mention in passing was, given the county's interest in county nightlife, this idea that that someone has to pay $400 every time they pick a site seems to be something that stands out as being a pretty difficult barrier to mobile food trucks. And as we move forward, we might just find a way to note that back to our county council colleagues, and we'll have an audience with one in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So that might be one of the most direct ways to do so. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. My question is, will inspectors have random inspections of the food trucks, or is it only when someone calls in a complaint will someone go out and inspect?
Do you mean for health or
Health
for
or
city?
City to make sure that they're licensed? Do they have to display the license in the window? How does...
They will have to display their license. I don't think administratively well, I'm not aware of the plans on how to enforce. I suspect that most of it will come from complaints and observations of staff and the council.
So we won't be proactive and actually look for any issues. If something comes up, then we deal with it.
That's one approach. I think I'm sure staff is open to council's input on how to do this, and I'm sure we'll learn from experience.
I think at least, for the first 6 months to a year that, since this is so new, it would be helpful to do spot checks and make sure everybody is in compliance.
I guess one question, I'm not sure who on staff would would do that. Not, I mean, it's obviously not housing code enforcement officers, which come from the county.
Someone was looking for lunch.
Someone's hungry.
We can take a look at it. I'm not sure if we'll have people ready.
Okay.
Thank you. The council on a rotating basis can go through.
Will we be reimbursed?
No, only if you get food poisoning.
It's unclean.
So is the council comfortable with this, and we can go forward and schedule this for adoption of an ordinance?
Yes.
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 Okay, I see everybody nodding or saying yes, so we can schedule this and go forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Shall we just keep going?
Yeah. It's early. It's 8 o'clock.
Okay.
8:30.
Legislative update, and the deputy city manager is not here tonight. Did the city manager have anything you wanted to say, or do you want me to run through some things, or you're happy to let me do it?
Happy to let you.
Okay. First off, I can report that I did spend 7 hours in Annapolis yesterday. The first part of which was to hang out in the Economic Matters hearing room for 2.5 hours, waiting to testify for about 30 seconds. That's the way it goes sometimes in Annapolis, and I would have to say it was my second worst experience in going to Annapolis to testify. Yesterday was Alcohol Bills Day, and this was not all of the alcohol bills, because there are some that came in after the deadline, and so they're going to have another round of alcohol bills. But there were 45 bills being considered yesterday, and the committee did not use a timer and just let people talk. And so we were the 14th bill considered out of 45, and I had my 30 seconds at 3:30. I did hear some other interesting things as I was relaying to the city manager and at least two of my colleagues this afternoon that learned more than we ever wanted to know about vaportinis, which are essentially ways to drink alcohol by vaporizing it and inhaling it, kind of like a bong for alcohol. And just,
Did any of your colleagues take you up on that?
there was some discussion. There was also interesting discussion about microbreweries and their annual production limits, and when do they become breweries as opposed to microbreweries. And I guess the current limit is, I think, it's either 22,000 or 60,000 gallons per year, and just discussions about changing that. And the most interesting, longest, and bizarre conversation was about a bill to expand the shipment of kosher wine sold in the state. And it was about a 45-minute discussion with many pros and many cons and many divergent tracks of conversation that were things I'm not going to go into here. But it was unusual and interesting and boring all at the same time. And I hope my colleague, Councilmember Grimes, who's going later this week to the Senate side, has a better experience. I think you will, because I think they deal with these bills differently in the Senate. It should be a lot simpler. I hope it is. Otherwise, you may want to throw your head against the wall.
Thank you.
So fair warning, take lots of material to occupy yourself. While I was in Annapolis yesterday, I did have some discussion with our lobbyist, Michelle Douglas, about strategies and ways to try and get the highway user revenue bills that are in this year, especially Senator Edwards' bill and Senator Colburn's bill, to make some progress on not just holding on to the money that's in this year's budget, but actually working toward the permanent fix of HUR monies, and the sense that the city may be kind of in the forefront in these efforts to try and testify and work these bills along with Senator Madaleno in trying to make something happen on a more permanent basis and not wait for next year with a new legislature with probably 40% new members, and a discussion with her about the fact that it's taken a long time to get the legislators to understand that this is particularly an issue for municipalities, not as much of an issue for the counties. They have other ways of funding things, and a recognition that the counties acknowledged that when they essentially threw the municipalities under the bus a number of years ago on giving up their highway user revenues for other things that year. And so wanting to be able to move forward and really work this issue this year, and that there is time to do this. Councilmember Grimes?
Has someone stepped forward to testify tomorrow afternoon? That's still the hearing date, right?
Correct. Not that I know of.
Yeah. I normally have a Transportation Planning Board meeting, but it sounds like this might be a higher priority.
Maybe the thing to do would be to correspond with the Deputy City Manager tonight, see what
Is she online?
there is, and get a little bit more information and see what the testimony is.
I'll reach out right now.
Okay, great.
Okay, because I'm unable to go tomorrow because I'm actually working tomorrow. So I think that that's an important thing to follow up on. I'm going to follow up on it at the next MML Legislative Committee meeting and try and make sure that MML is working as hard as necessary on this one, and not the message that I get back from them is that the leadership says that HUR issues are not going to be solved this year, but what leadership wants isn't always necessarily what ends up happening, and there may be opportunities to push here. I can report on some things that the MML Legislative Committee talked about last week that may be of interest to us. One of the positions that we took was on SB 629, which is the bill that we've talked about, where it would enable counties and municipalities to add a $20 fee on vehicle registrations, and the committee took a position of support with amendment, and that amendment would be to reverse the priorities so that it's not the county that gets to go all the way to 20. First, the municipality gets the option to take as much of that $20 if we would want it, and then the county can have what's left after a municipality takes whatever portion of the 20. So it's not incumbent on us to take any portion of that, but if we wanted to, we could take all of it. So that's the kind of the position of MML, with the idea that don't keep saying we want more tools in the toolbox. Don't say we want more opportunities to get revenue. We're stuck with property tax and not much else. And then one is offered and we go, never mind, we don't want it, thanks. Another one is Senate Bill 781, sponsored by Senator Montgomery, and this essentially deals with the issue of recycling at public events. And I don't remember all the details. The committee didn't take a position, but it gets at the issue of providing recycling at all public events. And I was thinking about some of the issues that we've had in the past with the street festival and folk festival and different jazz festival, different public events that take place in the city, and what the recycling options are. So if that's something that we wanted to see if we wanted to weigh in on, or just take an interest in, see what's in there exactly, and whether, I don't think it has any particular effect, but whether it might add some enforcement capabilities on our part for these types of public events.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Does that have anything to do with polystyrene, styrofoam? Do you know?
Not so far as I know. But I asked about that when this came up, and shared with colleagues there the experience of the young activists coming and talking to us about that aspect, and people were appreciative of the fact that the young activists were in Tacoma Park, and they were not surprised that that took place here, and they were, I would say, I won't necessarily characterize their unanimous respect for that, but I would say there was a recognition that that's something that they didn't necessarily have in their communities. Whether they wanted it or not, I can't say.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking that if this recycling bill would give us some enabling authority to, for the city of Tacoma Park, not for the rest of the state. I mean, that would be beyond hope to effectuate the abolishment of styrofoam containers at public events.
It might be, and we could make that known if we wanted to do that.
I hadn't had the impression that we needed that authority.
Well, maybe we don't.
Don't know, but we could, if anybody wants to look at SB 781 and see if there's anything in there of interest, we could take a look at it.
Okay.
The committee supported Senate Bill 913, which is Senator Raskin's bill to modify the ethics laws, as we've discussed. There was an interesting one. I don't think this affects us, but it could. There was opposition to House Bill 809, which is Delegate Waldstreicher's bill, and this would, it's a tort claims bill about synthetic turf, and it would remove the $200,000, $500,000 liability limits for any injuries on synthetic turf. I don't believe we have any synthetic turf, do we? So if this bill passed, and if we did have synthetic turf, the tort claims would be unlimited.
Mayor, I'm just glancing at 781 about the recycling, and a large part of this is requiring recycling in public and commercial buildings, and Montgomery County already does that. So it that aspect of it seems like it wouldn't affect us.
If you have a chance and can keep looking, see if you find the public part.
Yeah.
House Bill 829, the Municipal League is opposing that bill. It's Delegate Summers' bill, and it's about municipal elections, and it would force us to file all our campaign reports within 10 days with the state, and I believe that our campaign reports now are just on file with the city clerk. The feeling was that this was the nose under the tent, that this would make it so that there would be pressure to make all of our campaign filings agree with state law. Currently, municipalities have the ability to determine our own campaign finance laws and our own campaign laws and set our own elections. And this was just seen as, gee, you're going to make us comply with your system and add costs, and we don't need to go there. And I said there were a number of ways in which municipalities have different forms of elections, and for particularly for some of the smaller ones, it sounds like some of them don't even have campaign finance report, and would they need to generate that, and it would need to be on the state's form. So just thought that might be of interest. There was a HB 873 that the League supports with amendments, and this is about divided highways with certain speed limits and whether there have to be crosswalks. This came out of issues down around Salisbury and Wicomico County, where there's a state highway, which is probably Route 50, and with a speed limit that's a higher speed limit, and it's been very dangerous for pedestrians to get across. So there was a lot of talk about, well, gee, I have state highways like that in my community where it's a safety issue to get across, and I was thinking of New Hampshire Avenue, and it had to be a 6-lane highway. So it was New Hampshire Avenue and Piney Branch Road, and whether if there were an enforcement of certain rules for putting crosswalks across state highways, the end of the discussion was that the League would support that for safety measures, but add a requirement that the state has to fund the crosswalks. rather than the way it was written, it would be up to the municipality to put the crosswalks across the state highway. And the question that came up in my mind later was, well, this is 6-lane highways. If it were less than 6-lane highways, in many times we've wanted to have the ability to put a crosswalk across a state highway. So it's not applicable in this one, but if there was anything that we wanted to weigh in on and say, well, yeah, state highway should do it, or is there a way in which we should say state highway shouldn't do it, let us do it across their highway?
And of course, that only applies to New Hampshire Avenue and Tacoma Park. Piney Branch Road's only.
Did I say
3
Piney
lanes.
Branch?
Yeah.
University.
Oh, okay.
University Boulevard, sorry. So just an interesting bill. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but wanted to make you aware of it. One that's just of interest that the league took no position on, HB 898, which is Delegate Ozalewski's bill, Olszewski's bill. That's on the personal property tax and to provide an exemption for manufacturing properties. And I was reminded of our discussions a couple of years ago about the personal property tax and bank equipment. And so people felt that this wasn't necessarily going to go anywhere, but I just wanted to let you know that these type of issues about personal property tax keep cropping up. HB 1312, we needed more information and held that bill for consideration. It would require public access to any property acquired with program open space funds, and the feeling was that it was going to apply mainly to access to schools if program open space funds were used for some aspect of schools, and that might be the issue of how do you limit public access to schools given security and safety concerns, that it probably wasn't in effect for municipalities because our program open space funding tends to be for parklands, and we provide public access to those parklands. So that may not be an issue, but I may have more information on that next week. And the final one that was of interest, the league is opposing HB 1250, which was put in by Delegate Hucker. This is a refined version of his bill that he had in last year, where he would define all of the state secretaries and county officials and city officials as lobbyists. The bill this year, he took all of those other people out and just left us in. So it's okay for the state secretaries and the county officials and everybody and Mako to
Why is he doing
do
this?
what we could. I don't know, but he and Delegate Bobo and one other delegate put this in, and it's like, what are you trying to do to us? So the league is opposing that bill. That's HB 1250.
Is there anyone, Common Cause, anyone like that behind this? Progressive Maryland?
My sense from last year is that it was people who were out to harass Mako.
Sorry.
So that's the ones that I wanted to bring you up to date on in terms of what's been happening.
Wait till Tom said no, county official himself. Oops.
Didn't you say the bill now excludes county officials?
I think so.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to read
it's well set up, though.
I didn't get a chance to read the bill, but that was the discussion. That came up.
That's a little self-serving.
And then the deputy city manager provided a list that we have at the dais of a couple of things, the bills of interest with hearings this week. Speed monitoring systems, I think I said last week that this was all going to be consolidated into one bill, this basically the speed cameras. And the feeling, I don't know if I relayed this or not, but the feeling was that this is going to go through, that there are going to be changes to speed cameras, and that it's going to require that all of the contracts change over within 3 years and get away from a per citation cost for the contract between the city and the vendor, and this will most likely go into effect. I'm looking, and the residential leases, just cause evictions. You can see in front of you that the HB 843 prohibits a landlord from requiring a tenant to carry renter's insurance, naming a landlord as beneficiary. So I guess that must be a problem somewhere. And then just standard just cause eviction language on HB 946 and SB 181. And then we've talked about the street lighting. So I don't know, do we know whether who might be able to testify on that bill? Senator Carr's bill, there was a question of whether Darrell might be available, and I'm not sure what the outcome on that is.
That's the one that's on Thursday?
220? 220, yes.
Yeah. I will find out. I'm not sure who's available for that one.
Okay, and we need to coordinate with Delegate Carr's office, who's going to be testifying so that they can set up
Then
panels.
Friday afternoon is the.
And the feeling was that this bill has a much better chance this year than it has had other years. Any questions or discussion on that one?
I'd consider going, but now the WMATA the WMATA Real Estate Committee meeting is 11:30 on Thursday, and that's a priority for me, and I doubt it would be possible.
You know, I'd be willing to testify for the city.
It's Thursday at 1.
Not necessarily to preclude Darrell Braithwaite, because Al told me, I was talking to him last night about this bill, and down in Annapolis, and he was saying that Darrell had testified favorably for in the past and had done an outstanding job. So maybe we can do something in tandem. I don't know. But on the other hand, maybe, let's just sort of talk it out.
Any other updates on any legislation, anything that is not part of the final item, which is the proposed resolution?
I have a question. Delegate Hickson has talked about introducing a Safe Playing Fields Act that would restrict the use of pesticides in school fields, fields used by children. Did anyone talk to her about that? No.
Somebody,
Okay.
it sounds like somebody did.
Well, not an official. Is anyone other than pesticide control proponents? No, I guess is the answer.
Not so far as I know. I know that I talked to a couple mayors who are interested, and I need to get together with them about efforts, other municipal efforts,
Yeah.
particularly in Prince George's County.
Right.
Mayors of College Park and Greenbelt. Okay. So I don't think we had any potential action coming out of those updates. If anybody comes up with anything from those or other ones before next week and there's anything we need to do, we will pursue that. So our final item this evening is the resolutions commenting on state legislation, and I see that we have revised additional information, the salmon sheet at the dais.
May I make a remark?
Sure, Councilmember Grimes.
Per our earlier discussion, I put together a draft here, and I did this as what I called the omnibus resolution, mainly because it gave me the chance to use the word omnibus.
And can you give us a precise definition of omnibus?
Meaning that it captured a number of things that were in the same general category in a single piece of paper. That seems simpler than drafting a bunch of different resolutions. The idea was that if the council decides they don't want to go forward with any one or two or whatever of these, those could simply, the whereas clauses and the the resolved clause could simply be modified. The whereas clauses could be dropped for that item, and the item stricken from the resolve clause. That's all I have to say. So it wasn't, no, actually, it isn't all. Yeah, it looks like city staff corrected the title of the local investment thing, which has changed within the last few days, so that's going to need to be changed here. Not local business investment law, it changed to something else, which I can pull up. That change appears to have happened only today.
Okay. There was some discussion last week about items that would go into this. I sent an email, when was it? Friday? Asking folks to weigh in just so that we had a sense of making sure that the will of the council was reflected in this, in these potential resolutions. I don't necessarily know whether people want to proceed with the omnibus ones. Do you want to talk about the individual ones, go through them and kind of check them off so that we know if we're dealing with separate or omnibus?
I'm happy with the resolution as Mr. Grimes drafted it.
Okay.
And for me, there are some of these I'd support, some I would not support, so I would rather be able to go through them one by one.
Okay. That's my general feeling as well, but I want to be efficient at this and, see if that's what people want to do. So Councilmember Schultz, you're agreeing that...
With you and Councilmember Mayo, that it would be better to deal with them.
Okay. So why don't we deal with them individually?
That comes out 3-3. I didn't hear forced support for doing them individually.
Councilmember Smith.
I mean, there's some of these that I would not support, but I would look the other way and just would rather take it how it is that Councilmember Grimes has presented to us.
I obviously support them all, but I don't want to force people in a 3-3 divided council to accept things that they don't like, and I don't see any harm in taking them individually and deciding whether we want to strike them.
Because all I wanted to do was discuss them individually.
Sure,
and then we were done.
I think that seems appropriate, proper.
Okay.
You've got 4 votes. I'm happy. I'm happy.
Okay.
I'm happy or happy.
Everybody's happy. So the first one is the SB 394, the statewide container recycling refund program. Does anybody want to have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I'll just
Go ahead, Councilmember Schultz.
say something about it. Some comments were made at the beginning by Mr. Wilkes, which I appreciated hearing, particularly the experience in Massachusetts where he comes from. But I was thinking about that, and it's important to understand that we're not talking about a container bill for the city of Tacoma Park, where we have a very efficient recycling. We're talking about for the state of Maryland, which doesn't have an efficient way to recycle bottles. This doesn't have any, this proposed bill doesn't have anything to do with cans, and it doesn't have to do everything to do with everything that's glass. And so it's a narrowly written draft, and I appreciate. The problem is that along the highways and byways of the state, neighborhoods, and lots of cities like Baltimore, where I lived for many years, and even in our own town, like along New Hampshire Avenue, it's not appropriate to say that this is that we don't have a problem. I said this last week, and I'll say it again: is that in right-of-ways like New Hampshire Avenue, and I'm sure like Ethan Allen and on University, where we have a lot of cross-town traffic. I've worked on some state highway cleanups where you walk along and collect all the trash, and the volume of particularly water bottles and beer bottles is just staggering. And most of that, I'm sure, comes from automobiles, people going by. And there's no way that that stuff's ever going to get recycled. It just sits there and accumulates and accumulates. And it's just, it's so discouraging to see this. We're walking down New Hampshire Avenue and looked over one of the rails down into an area that's wooded and is almost inaccessible, and there was a huge backup of stormwater and just hundreds and hundreds of water bottles floating there that had just washed down into that ravine. And it was just something incredible. So if there were a better way for us to be able to, how to do this, I would be the first to sort of say, let's do it. And but I just think that again, I mean, I guess it can also be said, as with any of these Senate and House bills, that if we don't pass a resolution supporting it, it may not make that big a difference in the outcome. But I kind of think that I'd like to see the city to say something in favor of it. I'm not going to shed tears if we don't. I'll just, hope that the bill does get signed into law.
Councilmember Grimes.
Yeah, I also wanted to acknowledge Mr. Wilkes' comments, although he's not here. He had asked me before the meeting whether this covered water bottles, which he saw as, that is plastic water bottles, which is the major source of littering from bottles and cans and so on. So the answer is yes. It doesn't cover wine bottles that he asked me about. He mentioned the possible crowds in Whole Foods and so on and so forth. The law does talk about setting up or mandates setting up redemption centers. It doesn't say that the vendors would have to take back the containers themselves. I believe that's not the intention. And further, people in Tacoma Park, since that was his particular concern, although I recognize, as Councilmember Schultz does, that the major benefit is going to be outside Tacoma Park, not just proportionate benefit. It's not incompatible with our recycling program or anyone else's established recycling program.
Councilmember Smith turned out your light?
Yes, Councilmember Grimes answered my questions.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
I'll just relay real quickly the discussion at the MML Legislative Committee. MML took no position on this bill. The points made were that this will cherry pick recycling from the recycling stream, and that was seen as a minus for municipal programs, that it could add in participants, which is a plus, and it could reduce our municipal revenue stream from single stream recycling, could kind of cannibalize things from that, and that was seen as a negative. So I kind of feel like as an individual, I always wondered why the state didn't have a deposit recycling system. From knowing the details of how this can work and how recycling works in Tacoma Park, I can see some potential downsides for our recycling program, depending on the amount of money that we get for our recycling. Sometimes we get money, sometimes we have to pay money, so it kind of depends on what the market is doing. But with single stream now, it's all going to the one place. Does the city manager know whether we're currently kind of revenue neutral, positive, or negative on our recycling?
If I remember from the the Public Works presentation on the expansion of food composting, I think it's still a cost center for the city in terms of we're not breaking even on recycling. I think we're still paying a fee we're still not making enough money on recycling compared to what we have to pay to recycle. So
therefore, if it cherry picks out of our recycling stream, that could be a good thing.
Perhaps, or it could just make us a little bit more negative.
Okay.
So
So the answer is maybe.
Maybe, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure, and it sounds like we're still not sure. Councilmember Mayo.
I plan to vote for us to support this bill. I grew up in Connecticut at the time that a statewide recycling program was put into place. My best friend as a child, bless his heart, a lifelong Republican, all through high school, junior high school, would jump out of a car on the side of the road, pick up bottles to recycle for the 5-cent deposit. He was a one-man, clean up the roadside advocate for no other reason than there was a 5-cent deposit on those bottles, and he wasn't going to let money go to waste. And so just seeing that one individual example of how it can change a stewardship ethic by putting money behind it, that's just one additional reason why I support this legislation.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just say that I was one of those people who jumped out of the car. Not jumped out of the car. I jumped off my bicycle to get the bottles because that funded my candy bars and my sodas. So I support.
And look what that did for you.
That's right.
Okay,
Just
so
add one point.
Sure, Councilmember Schultz.
That I think it's helpful to think that if somebody told a young person that if they walk down New Hampshire Avenue on either side of the street and they're going to find a whole lot of nickels lying on the sidewalk and in the gutters, you wouldn't have any trouble getting lots of people scampering down there to pick up all the nickels. That's basically what it is, although in my conversation with Al Carr last night, he thinks that the bill could be amended to increase it from a nickel to a dime. But
Then you'll see council members out there doing it.
you'll see council members out there doing it.
Pick up stuff sometimes anyway.
Okay, I think we clearly support SB 394. I'll move to the next one. That's House Bill 1243, Senate Bill 811, and that's the now renamed. Do we know the rename?
Corporations and Associations, Maryland Securities Act, Registration and Filing Exemptions.
Wow.
It's a more descriptive name, Registration and Filing Exemptions, the idea being, if you don't mind, the idea being that currently the Securities and Exchange Commission at the federal level recognizes people who have, I believe the figure is $1 million or more in investable income, or $200,000 a year in annual income as qualified investors who are not subject to restrictions, and anyone who doesn't have that kind of money is subject to restrictions. So this would change state law. In some way, Senator Raskin is the one who helped and his staff drafted this. I'm confident that they did it right to allow small-scale investments.
Other comments on this one? Councilmember Mayo.
I support us supporting this legislation. And I just think it's local origin, including drafting among the people who helped draft it, residents of Ward 2. It's clearly very small business focused on small investors, a $100 investment cap per person. It deals with the issues of registration, notification, warnings to investors from the state investment board, I think it's called. I can't remember what the name of it. I'm sorry, the Securities Commissioner of the Division of Securities. So it deals with the whole issue of letting people know about the risk of making these investments. It has notification once a business is soliciting investments. It just seems like really an experiment, but an experiment worth trying with regard to getting investments by individuals, like many of our residents, in businesses like many of those in Tacoma Park. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I would support this bill. I'm a big advocate for small businesses, but my reservation is the $100,000 mark per investment. I don't think that is sufficient for even a small business owner if they're going to open a bricks and mortar type of establishment. I read in the background documents that the $100,000 figure came from a recommendation to the SEC. It was not actually passed as a resolution. Is there any way we could support with amendment that the $100,000 amount is increased?
We could, if we're testifying on this bill, or if we send in testimony, we could note that we support with amendment and we think that should be raised. We could say that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I support this. I think it is not only a great benefit to the small businesses, but it also is brought on by some of the new age approaches for social funding. So I support it.
Councilmember Grimes.
I wanted to add one point, that this bill with the $100 limit on an individual investment is meant to work with crowdfunding platforms. So while the investors and the businesses that took the investment would have to be in Maryland, it wouldn't be a matter of a whole bunch of people writing $100 checks to some business and then the business having to keep track of, okay, I gave those people their interest payment and all that kind of stuff. It would be managed by a crowdfunding platform. So this is very much the direction things are going in the business world, using these kind of platforms for all kinds of things. And then another point, this is the $100,000 limit is on the investment that can be taken per year. Through this mechanism, it's not a restriction on other forms of investment.
Right.
Councilmember Schultz.
I don't support this, mainly because last week we said we would look to get some additional information to enlighten us on the substance of this bill, and I haven't seen anything like that so far. So I'm still left with the same questions I had a week ago, plus a few others that I've thought of in the meantime. But and I understand that there's sort of the nobility, if you will, of wanting to encourage average people to be able to invest in small businesses in the state of Maryland, and how that would possibly benefit small businesses. But I think that anybody who makes, this would be a loan, not a grant, because we already have the ability people to pitch in or inject equity, as they would call it in financing terms. This would be to allow people to lend money to small businesses. And I think most people who would be interested in lending money, you know, $25, $50, $100, are probably, hopefully, smart enough to realize that it's not really a loan, that they're never really going to get their money back, and that if there's any interest accruing, an interest, let's say, on $100 is going to end up being in the matter of very small change after a period of, say, 1 year or however long the loan lasts. So, in effect, what you're doing is creating a program to enable people to make loans, when in fact what they really want to do is just give money to a business because they're inspired by that business owner or the business concept, and they just think it's going to be exciting and make them feel good to do it. Just like you would give to a charity. You do it because you're not sure how the money's going to actually be used, but you just figure that it's going to get used in a good way. And having a crowdfunding platform means that somebody somewhere, some organization, is going to have to administer all these call them micro loans of $100 or less. If it's $100,000 and everybody gave $100, that works out to, or if everybody gave $25, then that would be 4,000 loans that would be accruing to one business. So obviously, somebody's going to have to create an intermediary. I think Councilmember, I almost called you Senator. Senator Grimes here is talking about a crowdfunding platform. And then obviously that's going to cost somebody some money, a lot of accounting and all of that. So, I'm inclined to support this simply because it's Jamie Raskin's a sponsor of it, and if he thinks it's a good idea, I have so much faith in the guy, it probably is going to work. But I just throw that up as a caution about why I'm skeptical about it, and why I'm not sure that this is really going to be anything really all that new when all is said and done. Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm trying to figure out if your hand was up or down on that.
I'm probably going to say no on that one. Just to be obdurate.
Another word tossed onto the dais tonight.
Yeah, take that.
Let me just add that I think I'll vote yes on this. It's probably a less than enthusiastic yes. I'm not sure I understand the fascination with crowdfunding, but I'll just admit that maybe that's just something I don't understand. So I don't quite understand the enthusiasm for it, but it's not like I'm against the bill. So, I'll vote yes, but I don't really care. It sounds like there's no more questions or comments on this one, and it sounds like that one is will receive a favorable vote. The next two, do you want to just take as a group, or do you want to deal with them individually?
The group.
Group? Okay, so both HB 879 and HB 880, SB 658, these are both marijuana legalization or decriminalization bills.
Wait,
Council.
typo here. Yep. This is probably, it says
Councilmember
dispensations, where it
Siemens,
should
is
say
that an old
dispensaries.
light or a new light?
New light.
All right, well then I'll start on this one.
Well, I didn't see your light up there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
There, my light's on.
Seems like some religious.
I have the experience of talking with my siblings every week, and I have heard an awful lot recently from my brother, who is the legislative director for the Association of Washington Cities in Washington State, where they have decriminalized marijuana along with Colorado. And I hear from him every week how half his job now, while their legislature is in session, is dealing with the fallout from that bill and the interface of its illegal federally and legal statewide, and how that all falls out on municipalities. And he basically is dealing with it as an unfunded mandate, that there's a lot of work that that their local governments have to do to figure this all out, and there's no funding from the state to do that. They have more enforcement duties, and so hearing all of that experience for the last number of weeks as he's been dealing with it leads me to feel like, personally, I might have one feeling about this, but from my elected position, I feel cautious about this being something that the state should do. I kind of feel like maybe Washington and Colorado ought to have a little more experience and figure out how it works. I also wonder whether it's really going to go anywhere this year. My sense of the legislature is that the minimum wage bills are the ones that there's the real push on, and that this may not go somewhere. So in thinking about how I might want to align the city's support for or against these bills, I think I come down not wanting to support these. And I'm looking for lights from colleagues.
Did you turn mine off?
That was an old one. You said so.
Okay, it's on now.
Okay, Councilmember Grimes.
I fully support these bills. I do note that in Washington State, the law is not fully in effect. Sure, when you make changes to the system, then things have to be figured out. That takes some effort. Look at the Affordable Care Act, at the terrible job the federal government and the state government, under the direction of Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, did in implementing Affordable Care Act enrollments. That doesn't mean that the Affordable Care Act itself is fundamentally bad. The goals are sound, to extend health care coverage to members of the portions of the population that health care wouldn't otherwise be accessible to. Similarly, these marijuana bills extend protections, or I'm sorry, they don't extend protections, they remove discriminatory, that's effectively discriminatory rather than necessarily intentionally, discriminatory enforcement against members of our society who can least afford to sacrifice their futures because they've violated a law that, in my personal opinion, it relates to something that is marginally harmful. Marginally harmful. I'll stop there. And I do believe this is a local matter, so I fully support these two and believe that the City of Tacoma Park needs to speak out on this issue.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I absolutely, unequivocally oppose the use of marijuana. I think it is a detriment on individuals, but at the same time, the issue in front of us is not about people using or not using marijuana, as we have seen in our history. People are using it. They're continuing to use it, whether it is legal or illegal. So the real question is, what is the what's the impact of it being deemed as illegal? And I think that what we've seen is a horrendous effect on our communities. I think it's clear that the impact, especially on the criminalization of our minors and our youth in our community, especially minorities, is just devastating. I think it's been demonstrated that the war on drugs is a complete failure. I think we have tried it for too long. It has filled up our jails. And I look back at Prohibition and what happened with alcohol when it was illegal, and it kind of had the same effect, that the government was unable to control it, control its use. And so I support this. And as far as the cost, I would say that it certainly is costing us money to enforce the laws as they exist today, but aside from that, the extreme cost that it's causing on the people in our community is far outweighs the additional costs, if there is some, for implementing this. So I support these measures. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I support both of these bills before us today. I think that it's time that we legalize marijuana and make it a controlled substance, just like alcohol. I mean, personally, it's not something that I would do, but I think that we are spending way too much money and resources through the police department, through the court systems, to take kids and put marks on their lives that they can never recover from. And this would give an opportunity that, maybe we can save a generation of kids that, could possibly be employable, or that could possibly, maybe change the direction of their lives. So I would support that I would advocate supporting both of these bills.
Councilmember Schultz.
I had the opportunity Sunday morning at Delegate Sheila Hickson's Breakfast Club to hear gubernatorial candidate Mizzier speak on this subject, and she made some really eloquent arguments because, as we know, she's campaigning on legalizing marijuana. I figure, and she's pretty articulate about it. But I've listened to the cases on both sides, and I think what I'm seeing is that there's a long continuum between what we have right now. It's on the books of treating the use of marijuana as a fairly serious criminal violation, to, at the other end of the spectrum, treating it as being done in Washington and Colorado as to encourage people to enjoy it as a recreational drug. So that sort of I find myself somewhere in the middle on that. I think that I could support decriminalization so that the penalties for using it in a non-medical situation wouldn't result in people ending up in jail or creating serious problems for young men and women who indulge in it. But on the other hand, I'm not ready to go so far as to say that it's something that it ought to be brought into our society on a wholesale basis, where we go through this long process that Washington and Colorado are going through. I'm open to that in the long run, however, but I think that for the state, I would want it to observe what's going on in Colorado and Washington over the next two or 3 years to see what its effects are on policing, what its effects are on young people, what its effects are on businesses who indulge in the business of producing and distributing and dispensing marijuana, just across the board. I just think there's a lot of stuff that nobody really knows how it's going to go. Those are two states that have made the decision to experiment, and more power to them. And I think we ought to take the opportunity to observe how that goes and learn from it, so that if we do, as a state, get around to legalizing marijuana or making it available for recreational use, like literally, that we'll be able to do it right from the beginning, and have the full support of law enforcement people as well as the medical community, and various demographic sectors of our society. I'm just simply puzzled, for example, on a personal level, if it gets to be a recreational drug, how does that, what happens if I go to somebody's home for a gathering, a social gathering? And right now, I think in our community where we live, it's customary for people to say, if you're going to smoke, please take your cigarette outside and enjoy your smoking outside. But if somebody's smoking marijuana, is that what's going to be customary, or do I get to inhale the fumes and find myself affected by it. I mean, if somebody's, in contrast, throwing down drinks and getting themselves inebriated, that's not going to affect my health directly. It may kill a few people on the highway, not necessarily myself. So, I mean, these are kinds of questions that I think a lot of people will have. Well, just how will this work? And I think as a intelligent society, we need to look and observe how it works elsewhere. There's really no rush for the state of Maryland to go into this. I'm very curious about it, and I agree with the arguments that I've heard here in favor that, if that the drug war has certainly not made a dent in the use of marijuana in our country. But anyway, that's where I'm on the whole thing.
So you're
I would support decriminalization, but that's just, I'm not going to go any further with regard to the idea of legalization, which I think is a much bigger step.
So you would support 879 and not support 880?
Yeah, based on what the titles of the two bills are, because I haven't read either bill.
Okay. Councilmember Mayo.
I guess I don't have the certainty of my colleagues that the efforts to limit, restrict, control, and treat the spread of illegal drugs is a failure. There are lots of drugs in use in our country, have been used today, were used in the past, crack cocaine, crystal meth, etc. And I don't have the knowledge to know that that has been a failure, the approach that the federal government and state governments have taken. I just say that by way of passing because I think it's important to put that on the record, given that my colleagues have done so. I think back on Councilmember Schultz's comments about the previous bill, which was a bill that would let a bill of roughly 500 words added to the state code that would let people put $100 checks into small businesses and get paid back. It's an investment, a security, paid back for that money. And the questions that he had with these issues, I have hundreds of questions that are not answered, and essentially feel, as some colleagues have indicated, that it would be better to wait and see what happens in Colorado or Washington, and maybe not just for 1 or 2 years or 3 years, but for longer. I don't know enough about issues like addiction, the health risks, lung cancer issues. When I look at this bill, I have questions. So, for example, the bill, the HB 880, allows you to grow marijuana plants in a home that has children in it. It's not clear to me if it allows you to smoke marijuana in a home that has children in it. And you can only grow them in a home with children if you make reasonable efforts to prevent access to those plants by the children. But I don't really know what that means. You're not allowed to smoke marijuana in a public place, but the issues of private property and how that relates to what Councilmember Schultz said. So I just end up having way too many questions on the issues that Councilmember Siemens raised with regard to the mark that this puts on people's records and the difficulty Councilmember Smith raised with regard to jobs and how it affects people's lives. I don't understand why a shielding bill, why a bill that would prevent portions of your criminal record from being revealed to employers, wouldn't satisfy that need. And there are other shielding bills before the legislature this session, for example, that would shield various crimes from review in an employment history or background check, for example. So for those reasons, I would oppose both of these bills. And ultimately, we don't have to weigh in on everything the state does. And I'm no expert on either of these issues, but I just have way too many questions to feel comfortable supporting them.
So I think I have the tally correctly that we're in support of SB 394, we're in support of HB 1243. If I understood Councilmember Schultz correctly, we're in support of HB 879, and we're split evenly 3-3 on HB 880. Is that correct sense?
Right.
So it sounds to me like the simplest method would be to strike the whereas on House Bill 880, starting at line 69. And the line 88. And that leaves a resolution that will have a favorable vote. So would somebody like to move that resolution with those
Second.
strikes? It's been moved and seconded. Any further council discussion? Is that an old light or a new light?
No, it's old light.
Okay.
There are 3 typos here that I'll give to the clerk. They don't substantively change anything.
Okay. And I'm assuming one of them is in line 28.
I missed that one. They make that 4 then.
Third word should come
In
out.
for residents. I do a bad job of proofreading my stuff.
That'll get a word processor.
Line
They can-
51,
You can buy one of those for a couple $100.
yeah, line 51 should be dispensaries rather than dispensations. Line 59 should be lesson rather than less. There's an S missing on delegates on line 65.
Okay, sounds like we have a resolution that's been moved and seconded. We've had our discussion. All those in favor of that resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That carries unanimously. That's our last item of business for this evening. We are adjourned.
Love it, love it, love it.
Woo-hoo.
Hey, my name's Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate, bringing you a few words of peace, something to live by. Now, I'd like to tell people out there that sometimes I ask people if they want to come down to the demonstration.